I've never been a fan of the whole history repeats itself thing. It just simply doesn't happen. History doesn't repeat itself. It echoes. I mean, we'll see similarities. And so that's always kind of cool when you can kind of look back and go, I think we've been through something similar before. But to me, the study of history has always been more about gaining a fuller and deeper appreciation for why things that are happening today are happening.
Listen, I'm here with Pete Rayls today, and I get to look at you. Unfortunately, the audience doesn't, but I see a smile there, and you're in Canada.
I am, yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Pete, I mean, just to give listeners a little context, in our case, which is not the case with all the guests on the show, but we actually met a long time ago.
A long time ago, 1994-ish.
I
would
believe
be
that.
About right. About
yes.
right.
93, probably the
93,
fall
94.
of 93.
Yeah.
In the University of Oregon marching band.
Yes, indeed.
That long ago.
Indeed. Good times had by everybody.
Everyone and 60 of their closest friends. I mean, we had an exponential amount of fun, I think, in those years.
We definitely did. It was definitely one of those crazy periods of transition down there in Eugene.
Yeah.
Considering, we were there at the birth of Oregon football as it's now known.
The modern era of
Yes.
Oregon football, yes.
Yes.
We've now lost half the international audience. Like,
We
I don't know
have.
what this is. Yeah. So now I'm sitting here in Tokyo, and you are in...
I am in Kingston, Ontario.
Kingston, Ontario. So just real quick, what's the overview of what you do and why you're in Kingston, Ontario?
So I am currently a PhD candidate in Canadian military history at Queen's University, working on my dissertation in history right now to get my doctorate.
Canadian military history.
Yes, history is one of those kind of quirky things that when you go for your doctorate, you get very specialized, and that's my specialty is Canadian military history with some minor specialties in U.S. history.
I see. Okay. I mean, you already have quite a large base, a large foundation with American history. So now you're...
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. And where did you get that base? I mean, that's obviously I know a little bit about that answer, but
Yeah,
could you share
no worries.
Share your educational and work history just to give a brief introduction, and then we'll get into some meat.
Absolutely. So I got a kind of oddly enough, I have a bachelor's of science in history from the U.S. Military Academy, because that's all the U.S. Military Academy offers is bachelor's of science. So no matter what field it is, it's going to be a BS. And I specialized in military history at West Point, and then a few years later, I got the chance to go to Ohio State, and I have my MA in American history from them.
Now, wait a minute. I think it's the Ohio State, right?
So I probably, yes.
Yeah.
I probably will get a call from Columbus tomorrow telling me that my degree has been revoked because I did not put the into the Ohio State.
Listen,
Yes.
I just don't want you to have a backlash from Ohio. So
It's all good. It's all good.
So you've really been immersed in the study, the teaching, and the practice of thinking about, writing about, and sharing about history.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, between a senior thesis at the end of my time at West Point, my master's thesis at The Ohio State University, and then I spent 3 years teaching U.S. history at West Point after I got my MA, and then when I got out of the U.S. Army in 2012, I spent another 3.5 years teaching history in the independent school arena, so private schools.
Private schools, okay.
Yep.
Wow, that's quite an experience. And I know you've lived in various different places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you were at West Point in New York.
Yep.
And then didn't you go to Europe? You were in Europe for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, we twice. So I did
Okay.
2 tours in Germany. The first time in Bamberg,
Oh,
and then the second time in Ansbach. And in the middle of my time in Bamberg is when I had my lovely 1 year in the Middle East, in Kuwait and Iraq.
oh,
So
okay. Wow, I
yeah,
did. I actually didn't know that you
yep,
were in Kuwait and Iraq. Okay.
yep. 2004 to 2005.
I don't mean to be in any way snide about this, but what does
No.
a history expert do in Iraq
Well,
during a war, I should say, or
yeah,
during
well,
a
yeah.
conflict? Yeah.
So at the time, the Army did not consider me a historian.
Okay.
I was working in the HR field, the Army's
I
human
see.
resources field. So I had a human resources detachment, which comprised of 2 different platoons. One platoon ran a post office, so I was responsible for a post office in Iraq, and then another platoon that was taking care of various HR issues, promotions, awards, ID cards, you
Yeah.
name it. We
Yeah.
kind of did all that kind of admin kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Now,
And
were
then,
you there for a year, like separated from the family, or just by
mm-hmm,
yourself? Oh, wow.
mm-hmm.
What was that like to be separated from? I don't know what year this was. So
It's 2004 to 2005.
okay, so you had you didn't have
We
kids at
were.
that
I
point,
was
right?
married. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just. Yep, it was just Sue and I at the time.
Okay. Okay.
So.
But how was that being deployed and dealing with that
Oh,
long
I mean,
distance?
it's tough. It's tough, and I feel I was very fortunate because given the kind of work that I did, I had I had a dedicated internet drop in my
Mm.
office,
Mm-hmm.
so I was able to set up a VoIP account, and
Ah.
so unlike a lot of my colleagues and peers, I could talk to my wife almost every night,
Yeah.
and we could just kind of catch up on things, and it was a part of the rhythm of the day,
Yeah.
you know, kind of just based on the kind of work we were doing. I was able for the most part to keep basically kind of a 9 to 5 schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So at 5 o'clock, the soldiers would leave. I would shut the door to my little office and call my wife, and we would sit down and talk. We would sit
Wow.
down and talk for an hour or so and just kind of catch up on the day and be able to kind of get through it together.
I'm wondering how that changed the relationship. I don't mean to get into your marriage per se, but I
Yeah,
have
no, yeah.
experience with, like, when you're not physically close to someone but you talk regularly, sometimes in my experience you can actually go deeper in certain ways, about certain conversations, and kind of develop another area. Of course you want to be together, but
Yeah, yeah, no, I know absolutely, but it's also interesting. Just even with those daily talks,
mm-hmm.
you find that really for the better part of a year, you kind of really
Mm-hmm.
do still go down separate paths,
Ah,
and part of it is just because of the different ways that you are each coping with the
I
situation,
see.
and with life too, and with just the rhythm of life and who's a part of that rhythm in
Uh-huh.
your life. When those things are changed that much,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's pretty heavy,
It's almost like you're
and
not on the same planet. So you don't have
yeah, yep, very much.
the shared context of regular life. So you spend a lot of time kind of talking about who you met, but the other person has no idea who they are. Is that kind of what
Oh,
part of it?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And like and one like really funny story, and one, it's still basically funny, but my wife got into community theater when I was gone, and that was kind of part of
Oh,
her coping skill,
yeah.
and she got to be really good friends with this guy named Travis.
Uh-huh.
And for about a week, I just kept hearing about oh well, Travis and I are hanging out, and Travis this and Travis that, and all, and finally, like about a week or so into this, I'm like, hold on a goddamn second, who the hell is this Travis guy? And my wife is just like,
Oh.
oh, yeah, don't worry, Travis is gay. He's in the theater with me. It's all good. And I was just like, oh, right. So, and we're still friends with Travis,
Yeah.
kind of long distance and stuff. But, so it's just kind of one of those, and that's just like one of those things where like
Yeah.
the rhythm of life
Yeah.
just kind of takes you in a crazy place. And then it's like,
And it happens
this-
fast.
yeah,
I think that's
it
what
does,
you're-
absolutely does.
Yeah.
But, but then like the second thing was just, like like our phone times were religious. Like we were religiously kept to, I think with her in Germany, I was 2 or 3 hours ahead of her.
Right.
So, so it'd be mid-afternoon for her, late afternoon, early evening for me, but we always did it. We always called. And, and even though I couldn't necessarily tell her why I wasn't going to be able to be on the phone for whatever reason, because every once in a while I'd be like, yeah, I would have to go somewhere, and I wouldn't, I'd just be like, hun, I'm not going to make the phone tonight. And we would just kind of leave it at that. I remember like one night in particular where for whatever reason she must have been out somewhere and she got delayed.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't pick up.
Mm.
And I remember just the sense of panic that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Where's my wife? Oh my God, something's happened to her. What is like, I just total freaked out.
Right.
And and of course it turned out like she just gone somewhere, got delayed, hadn't,
Yeah.
there was nothing serious, but like but it also just kind of put into perspective for me, like this is probably what my wife goes through on almost a daily basis.
So a moment of
Because-
empathy
because-
for you. Yeah.
Because that was just like,
Yeah.
because literally that was the panic I had was, oh my God, something's happened to her.
Yeah.
And what am I going to do?
And you can't protect, and you can't. All
Yeah.
those instincts are kicking in,
Yeah.
and you're far away. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, those are my two kind of the oddities of being separated and how life kind of plays funny games with you when you're separated for a year.
I was just thinking about, even before the pandemic hit, the idea of remote work, remote teams, globalized organizations in the private sector. Of course, we know in the public sector this is also the case, particularly with organizations that are massive, like the Department of Defense and other major like federal agencies, for example. But there's all this stuff on technology and connection, and and yet what we're talking about is if you're not physically in the space, in the same context with another person, it's really hard to maintain a sense of togetherness.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
are we fooling ourselves with these remote teams? How can you have? So I'm leaping from the house to the office, but actually humans are humans, and I'm wondering what you've learned from that experience that you think applies like over in the private sector in terms of maintaining good teams.
Well, so the interesting part of that is like, so the year that I was in Iraq, I was a detachment commander, and because my detachment was based out of Germany, my detachment kept its mission in Germany, so I had to split my detachment in half. Like
Now,
half of my
what's
folks
detachment is the actual group.
it's
group,
it's the equivalent of a company.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and at the time, I think I had about 60 or 70 people total. So I took about 30 or so with me to Iraq, and then another 30 stayed in Bamberg to keep taking care of the community in Bamberg.
I see.
So, kind of talk about some remote work situations.
Yeah.
And, and we didn't have video teleconferencing or any of that stuff. It was all just, you might be able to grab a telephone call with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
or if not, it was just all just email.
Email.
But then at the end, at the end of the day too, it was all just trust and faith that the folks that were back there knew what they were doing,
Mm-hmm.
and how you set up the teams. Like,
Talk about that more. What is that?
Oh, well, I mean, well, it's
Yeah.
just what it comes down to is in a situation like that, well, on the one hand, you're like, I need to take the A team with me
I see.
to Iraq. No, you can't take the A team with you, because if so, the mission back in Germany is going to go to pot. So
Right.
you have to have a mix.
Right.
You've got to have, like, are there folks that I would have preferred to not have taken to Iraq with me? Yes, absolutely. But because I needed quality folks in both places, you had to split it.
So when you took your detachment, you're basically your team. You took half the team, about 30 people, you said,
Yeah, about 30.
with you to Iraq, to Kuwait, and then to Iraq. Like, how did your job change?
Well, so obviously the biggest change for me is that, when I was in Germany, like, I didn't have to worry about protecting people and, geez, do I have folks who are getting on the road, and are they going to be safe on the road, and do they have to worry about bombs blowing them up?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to worry about somebody lobbing some missiles into my base?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have, you don't have any of those worries in Germany.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, those become real worries
Yeah.
when you're in Iraq. So, I mean, that's probably the number one. The number two is, quite honestly, I had never done the postal job before. But, they were like, by the way, you're going to take your detachment and you're going to have this postal group with you and you're going to run it. So,
A postal group,
okay.
so a group responsible for disseminating mail. Is that?
Well, I mean,
What does
so, yeah, I mean, well, we ran a full functioning post office.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like, you come in, you buy your stamps, you drop off your mail,
Right.
the mail comes in, we sort it out, we give it to units to give it to their folks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredibly gratifying. It's an incredibly gratifying job to have,
Yeah.
I
have to
because,
say,
like,
if
you're
I,
the lifeline.
if I needed to change up my organization quickly, I would just go out and find some military people. I think that because the experience of change management, working in volatile conditions, is just unparalleled.
Well, yeah, well, and I mean, and keep in mind too, it's just, that job that I had as detachment commander lasted just over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from my job teaching history at West Point, that was my longest single job in the Army, was 2 years. And that's pretty, and yeah, by Army standards, 2 years in one job is actually pretty long.
It's a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's part and parcel, especially for officers. It's like the change is constant, going from one job to the next and just kind of quickly adapting to the needs of the job, figuring out what it is that your boss needs, potentially figuring out what it is that the people beneath you need, and
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like quite an experience.
Yeah.
So, how long were you in service, or how long were you in the military?
Yeah, so so if we don't count my time at West Point, I was an officer for 13 years. So I graduated from West Point in 1999 and got out in August of 2012. So just over 13 years.
So if you count West Point, you're looking at, 17 years, right?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
But it's kind of one of those oddities because it doesn't really, it counts, but it doesn't
But
count.
it doesn't
so.
count. So let's go way in the Wayback Machine here.
Yeah.
So like,
oh boy, the way back.
yeah, like really way back. Like,
Yeah.
So where were you hatched?
I was hatched in, I was hatched at Fort Dix. Not Fort Dix, I'm sorry. I was hatched at Fort McCord, Washington.
In Washington. Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't know
my
that.
parents.
Okay.
Yeah, my parents. My dad was in the Air Force at the time.
So you come from a lineage, a military lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And your mom was in the military also?
She did. Yep. She spent some time as a nurse.
Okay.
Interestingly, an OBGYN nurse,
Oh, wow. Okay.
delivering babies in the military.
Very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely important. Okay. So you're born on a base. So that was kind of
Hmm.
baked in the cake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then where did you, because you were coming up from Southern Oregon, I think, when we met by the time I
Oh no,
thought.
I was a Portland dude.
Oh, you were a Portland guy. Portland,
Yeah.
Oregon.
Yeah. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So after about 2 years after I was born, we actually went to the East Coast, and I lived in New Jersey for about 4 years. And then when my dad retired, we moved back to the West Coast to the Portland area, and that's where I basically did most of the growing up.
I see. Okay, I had that. I didn't. I had that history all wrong. Speaking of history,
That's all good.
so a Portland guy. So, but not just a Portland guy. I mean, you're all over the world. So I'm wondering, as a military brat myself and someone who's moved a lot,
Yeah.
like when someone in Canada or wherever you go says, "Hey, Pete, where are you from?" What do you say? I mean, what comes up for you?
It's interesting because I was contemplating that in the last week, and normally I would say, yeah. I mean, normally I would say I'm from
Yeah.
Oregon, right? And and like the entire time I was in the U.S. Army, I kept an Oregon driver's license. I always, always voted in Oregon, always filed state taxes in
Mm-hmm.
Oregon. But when I thought about it, I've spent the longest period of my adult life has been spent in New York.
Oh, interesting.
Between my 4 years at West Point as a cadet and then the 3 years that I spent teaching there. I have never lived anywhere as an adult more than
More than
that.
7 years. It's the magic
Yeah,
number.
I guess it
And
is.
you've been in
Yeah,
Canada now for.
just under three
Okay.
years.
You're halfway. You're halfway
Yeah,
there.
which is, oh, well, trust me, my wife and I always joke about, we call it the 2 to 3 year itch,
Oh, absolutely.
because
Yeah.
we just got ingrained in the
Yes.
military. It's like every 2 to 3 years, your brain is
Time
just
to
like,
go.
it's time to
Yeah.
move.
Yeah.
It's time to move, and
Yeah.
and and we actually did that a couple times after we got out of the military. And we are just like, we're just preconditioned that we get up and
Yeah.
move. So we're hoping that this is settling down a bit
I mean,
finally.
I relate to that instinct. I remember because until I've been in Tokyo now for over 7 years, and I
Hmm.
can't believe it. I mean, after about 2 or 3 years, I was like, "Oh, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go," and then I got over that hump, and then a couple more years later, I was like, "Whoa," and now I just feel like I'm in
Yeah.
uncharted territory, for sure. Yeah,
Cool, man. That's cool.
yeah.
I'm jealous.
So it's time to move.
No, don't do it. Don't do it,
I
man.
can't do it right now. So, so let's talk about West Point. So, because back when we met,
Yeah.
we were just very young bucks, early, basically kids in college, young adults.
Couldn't even legally drink at the time.
That's right. That's right. And then I remember you went off to that military school that I didn't know much about, and turns out that
Hmm.
military school is a very iconic, very historically important institution, and called West Point. And of course, it's been around a long
Yeah.
time. So, what was into the decision to go to West Point? And I'd like to hear more about your experience there.
So the decision to go to West Point's kind of a funny one because originally when I was in high school, I had dreams of going to the Naval Academy. And as it turns out, in my last year of high school, the Naval Academy said, no, we don't want you. Which is why I ended up down in Eugene and met Matt Stone among other
Yeah.
people. But I always knew that I had always had it in my brain that I was going to reapply to Annapolis. So part of that was, well, I better kind of show that I'm interested in the military. So when I got to Oregon, I figured out, well, shoot, the University of Oregon doesn't have a naval ROTC program, but they have an Army ROTC program. So I'll just start taking some Army ROTC classes just to kind of have it on the transcript, show them I'm interested in. And along the way, in about the first year of doing those classes, I suddenly said, well, maybe West Point wouldn't be so bad after all. So when it came time to apply, I applied to both. And West Point was the first one to give me an offer.
You
So
took it.
I jumped on, I took the offer, yeah. And about 2 weeks later, Annapolis said, hey, we'd like
Offer you.
we'd like to give you an offer. And I said, too late. Sorry, already committed.
Competition amongst
See you later.
competition between the
Yep.
services, the branches.
You waited
Yeah.
too long. So yeah, that's how I ended up going.
So
off to
when
West
you
Point.
get the letter from West Point, what's the length of time from the time you get the letter to when you're actually on the ground?
Oh man, it's not long because I it was the spring of '95. I mean, and as you remember, the spring term at Oregon goes into like the second week of June or
That's
so.
right. Mm-hmm.
And I was on the ground at West Point by the end of June.
Oh my goodness!
Because you're there the whole you're there the whole first summer.
So if it's the spring at some point, exact date, not remembering the exact date, but somewhere around there.
Yeah, probably March,
April.
like March or April. Probably.
So at most,
Yeah.
it was 2 or 3 months, but from the letter to the date that,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to wrap up school and then.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I had taken enough classes at Oregon that spring term of my sophomore year, I was technically a junior.
But then you start all over again at West Point?
You start
From zero.
Yeah, West Point doesn't.
They don't recognize anything,
Yep.
Right? It's like
you're there for four. You're
you
there
were at
for 4
Harvard.
years.
You were at Oxford. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, we have our program. You have to go through it. So I mean, the only good things. Well, the funny thing is, so I got out of taking U.S. history, but I got out of taking U.S. history because I had an AP score.
AP, right?
That got me out of.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I remember what I really loved is I had taken 2 terms of chemistry at Oregon. I didn't take the third, but I took 2. But I sat down because West Point would let you test out of chemistry. And I tested out of chemistry, and I was really glad that I tested out of chemistry because I figured my 2 terms at Oregon were probably easier than 3 terms at West Point. But then I sat down to take the calculus test because I had taken calculus in high school and I had taken calculus at Oregon. And about halfway through the test, my brain just
shut down.
It shut down, and I just said, you know what, forget it. I'll take calculus again because it'll be the third time, and it'll be the easiest. It'll be one of the easiest classes I take, and it absolutely was. And I'm so happy
good choice.
that I did calculus for a third time. I just felt bad because the math department thought I was going to be some kind of math major or something. And
you're like,
and
no, I
wasn't.
just really
like,
couldn't test out of this right now. Yeah.
I just really, it's the third time. I think I can handle this. I think I can handle this derivative pretty easily now.
So how did getting into and going, and you went across the country, so 3,000 miles away, how did that impact your life more broadly, your relationships, your family, what happened for you at that time?
Well, yeah, well, obviously it puts a new twist on life with the family. When you're at best, you see them 2 or 3 times a year, really. Unlike folks who might be kind of on the East Coast, it's a little bit easier to get home for longer weekends. If you're on the West Coast, it's, you're basically just, the winter break, spring break, and then, you usually get a couple weeks off in the summer. So usually about 3 times. I mean, I was super happy that my first year at West Point, the Army football team happened to play the Huskies.
Oh, the dreaded Huskies, yes.
The dreaded Huskies, but it was in Seattle, and I was in the band.
Yeah.
So I got to go with the band out to Seattle. So my folks were able to do the quick drive up from from Portland to Seattle, so I was able to see them real
Oh.
quick. But um, I actually kind of held it as a bit of a badge of pride that I spent 4 Thanksgivings in 4 different places.
Wow,
So
turkey all over the place.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of which I is fortunately that my roommate at Oregon his father happened to live not far from West Point, so it's like the first we actually traded
Oh,
families for
really? He went to your
Thanksgiving.
family and you went to
Yeah,
his? Oh, that's
yeah,
perfect.
yep,
Oh,
yeah. It
it's
was
good to
pretty
know
cool.
people. Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Make friends coast to
Yeah.
coast, folks, and globally. So, what was it? You know, a place like West Point that has such a storied history and a brand, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You get there, and I mean, it's very rare that a brand of anything that iconic. There's always a new learnings or something different than you didn't expect. I guess unexpected things. I think when you encounter
Yeah.
it's like if you encounter a super famous person, and you have an image of them, and then you
Yeah.
meet them, and you're trying to square your image with the reality. So I'm wondering.
Yeah. Which when we get to it, I can actually give you a West Point related
Oh,
version.
perfect.
I can give you two. I can give you two West Point related versions of it in a
Well,
minute.
that's where
But
I'm. No,
after
I
I
mean
answer
that's
your
where I'm going with
question,
it. I'm just curious. All this effort to get in, then you
yeah,
get in, you slam your bags together, you jump on a plane, and you're okay. Now I'm at West Point, and it's just a completely different
yeah.
culture. It's got all this stuff. So what was going on in your mind, and what were the things that surprised you when you got there, or that were unexpected?
Well, obviously there was the oh my God, what have I gotten myself into
Yeah,
moments. I
like
mean,
what?
I I cried myself to sleep the
Yeah,
first night. Yeah, I mean it's just kind
yeah,
of one of the. I mean it's such a shock.
mm.
I mean it's just a shock, kind of, and even as your brain thinks it has a
Hmm.
comprehension of what is going to happen, it it still won't it still won't measure up
All
to it.
right.
I
So
don't
what
think
happened? What?
so.
What
Oh, I mean it's all of it's just all the stuff that goes on that first day. Getting the haircut.
oh,
It's just like there's they do this kind of crazy thing pretty early on where they take you into this room. You still have your civilian suitcase with a couple of things, and they basically like you put a tag on it, and they say, and by the way, here's this set of like gym shorts and t-shirt with these really goofy black leather Oxfords and knee-high black dress socks. Put these on
uh,
because that's what you're wearing for like the majority of the rest of the day. It's just kind of that whole just
mm.
stripping you down. In some ways, actually, quite literally, but just kind of stripping you down to kind of start creating this unified
Uh-huh.
whole that's in the
To
image that West
remold
Point
you. So
wants.
your identity is
Yeah,
basically put
yeah,
in a
yeah. It's
lockbox. Yeah.
stripped. Yeah,
So that could be
yeah.
very
Yeah.
emotionally. That could be very emotionally disturbing. I would imagine, or difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just it's just overwhelming. I wouldn't. Yeah, disturbing is probably not the
Hmm.
right word. It's it's just so much of an
It's an
overload in
overload.
some ways. Eh,
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, that's probably about the best way. It's just yeah, you are just so overloaded with everything that's gone on that you're just like that's it.
Yeah.
What did I do? Why
You
am I
start
here?
questioning your decision.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. The bigger questioning came 2 years later at the end of my second year
Yeah.
because I was like, I should be graduating from college right
So
now.
you're like
And I'm not
undergraduate collegiate rhythm was like, wait a minute, why am I only halfway through?
this way through
Ah.
again.
So what else? So you get through the knee highs and the unflattering
Yeah.
fashion, and
Yeah.
you're being
Yeah. Right.
rebuilt. What were some of the things that happened for you, to you, around you that really stick out?
Just for like the whole 4 years or just kind of that initial
Oh,
summer?
I mean, Yeah, I guess yeah, I'll be more specific. So I guess what I'm wondering is like in the first year, how did you come out of that year differently than when you went in?
Oddly enough, I came out heavier.
Really? How did
I
that
yeah,
happen?
yeah, because well, quite honestly, I think I just put on
Oh,
muscle
okay.
mass. Because normally, yeah, because like the normal thing is people drop weight, but
But you were
a
thin.
I was a
Yeah.
buck 50. I was a buck
Uh,
50. Yeah, and I think they they put muscle on me, which was like that was fine.
yeah.
That was cool. Other than the first time I tried to put on like my civilian jeans and went, oh my, what's happened? I got to get some new
Yeah.
jeans. So
Although I have to
yeah,
think that um, needing a larger size because you have more muscle is probably a different sense than if you had been eating
yeah,
donuts.
it's
I
kind
mean,
of
it's a
cool.
different kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, but it's not like that. I felt like it's not like I was like looking at myself in the mirror going, dude, yeah. I mean, it was all just kind of
Yeah.
real subtle. It was all real subtle
Now,
stuff.
going from
So
a public institution, but a non-military public institution, very far
yeah,
away into
yeah.
that environment, what were some of the differences in terms of education and just the learning experience?
Well, obviously, probably like the number one difference is just that West, all classes at West Point are small.
What's
So
small look like?
even like your 20 or
Okay.
less. So there are no large lecture classes at West Point. So it's not like like when we're in our first year at Oregon, and it's chemistry class or
Hmm.
history class, and you go into the lecture and there's 300 or 400 students listening to the professor drone
Or their
on.
TA.
It's or worse, the
Right.
TA, right? No, it's like you and the teacher, whether that's a military teacher or a civilian teacher, and there's nowhere to hide.
Mm.
So you've got to be on it. You have to have done the work, and you've got to be
Mm.
ready to go. And so that's probably the biggest. That's probably the biggest difference.
Wow.
It's just there's nowhere
Yeah.
to hide. It and you can't
No.
skip.
Yeah. There's no running off for a
It's
beer
just,
on
yeah,
Thursday
there's yeah.
afternoon. It's nice out. Yeah. None of that.
Yeah, no, it's not
What's the
happening.
social life like at West Point?
The social life is what you
Mm-hmm.
make it. That's why for me getting into the cadet band was so important because like the cadet band was the hour or so every day or every other day of
Mm.
normalcy because even the upper class cadets at in the band treat you like a regular person on top of when there are trips like you get a couple
I
nights
see.
off where
Yeah.
you can be a college kid again.
Ah. Wow. That makes a lot of
So
sense. So
yeah,
what is what does it mean to have a friend to meet a friend at West Point? What like did
I don't really think it's any
yeah.
different than a friend
Yeah.
anywhere else. A friend's a friend, the person that you can support, can support you, and you can vent to and whine to, and sometimes they'll tell you to shut up, and sometimes they'll tell you, yeah, dude, yeah, that
Well,
sucks, but
I
it's gonna
guess
be
that's
all
what I'm
good.
getting at is that if you go through a difficult any kind of challenging experience can be such a
Mm-hmm.
great environment to develop incredible friendships because some of the regular rules of niceties break down. You get a different kind of feedback, you get a different kind of bonding that takes place, and I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
kind of if what kinds of friends you made and have those friends have you stuck with are they still part of your life or what happened with the environment, the people you met there?
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess I'm the bit of the oddball, because quite honestly, I mean, other than just like kind of the casual Facebook contacts, I don't really have a lot of contact with a lot of my classmates. They're great folks. I'm not, it's nothing against them. It's
Hmm.
just more I just haven't caught up. with
Well,
them.
because everybody graduates and goes,
But
you kind of go off to different places, right? I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, you'll usually still have some people you're around and with. I mean, in some ways, what's kind of more interesting, especially in the age of social media, are the people that you didn't necessarily have a friendship with at the time, who for whatever reasons through social media you've developed a bit of a closer
Mm.
relationship as a
Mm-hmm.
result.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
you got into history, one of the majors there,
Mm-hmm.
of many.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a Bachelor of Science.
Yes, it is. Oddly enough.
And how did that come to be? Like, what was it about history that inspired you to pursue it?
Well, I mean, I was a history major at
Mm-hmm.
Oregon as well. So it was pretty natural that I was gonna continue down the road of the historian. And history had always been my favorite subject in primary and secondary school. So it was just kind of a good fit. It was always a
Right.
passion for me. So it just continued.
Mm.
And honestly, like, yeah, I mean, being a history major at West Point was pretty was pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I mean, just um, one. Yeah, I mean, obviously, one is partly just really is just kind of being in that
Sure.
environment that's just steeped in
Yeah.
history. But because of being a history major at West Point, I was very fortunate and lucky enough to get to go on a battlefield tour in Normandy my junior
Wow.
year at West Point, which was like, it's pretty epic
Wow.
to spend a spring break tooling around France and looking at battlefields and kind of taking taking
And I
that
have to
in.
assume that before you were
Uh,
even there, you were studying that intensely, or you were studying a lot about it, and then you go over there. I mean,
mm-hmm.
because when
Yep.
I was a history major as well in undergrad, and I remember studying
Mm-hmm.
about Vietnam and Cambodia, actually with your wife, who was also in some of the same classes.
Dr. Glenn
Yeah,
May.
absolutely. Yes. Ken Debevoise. So, yeah, we studied a lot about Vietnam. And then there was a group of us that went to
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam. And I remember being,
I think I remember hearing
I mean, we
about
spent
this
a,
too. So for some reason I was just like, yeah, you've been to
yeah, that
Vietnam.
was the
That's right.
first time. I've been there several times now. I love that country. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, and it's amazing what's happened in the last 20 years to that, with that country.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But the people are amazing. And so we did 3 weeks there and a week in Cambodia right after studying intensively
Wow, four
about the
weeks. So
Vietnam
that's yeah,
War.
that's intense because I just spent a week in France, but
Yeah, and I guess my
four
point
weeks.
is that when you go to a place right as you're intensively reading about it, talking about it, studying about it, it just gives it a whole new perspective. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah,
what
yeah,
was that like for
absolutely.
you? What did you
Yep.
learn by going there as opposed to reading about it?
From a purely military
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, I mean, and probably any officer that's gone on any kind of battlefield tour will tell you this. It's that appreciation you gain of what terrain and what the ground actually how it impacts. It's one thing to look
Mm-hmm.
at the map. Even if it's a topographical map that
Yeah.
shows the contours of the land, until you actually get there and
Yep.
see it, it's you'll never
Yeah.
comprehend it until you're on it and you see what it's like, until you see, like in the case of Normandy, when you see hardened German bunkers and you go like, oh my god, dude, that's like concrete, reinforced concrete that's like 6 to 10 feet thick. Well, holy
You start
crap,
imagining what it would be
or
like to, yeah.
yeah, or
Mm-hmm.
you're on, or kind of the slightly surreal of, like you're at a place like Omaha
Mm-hmm.
Beach at low tide, where you can actually go like, wow, yeah, look how much beach those people had to cover on
Mm-hmm.
D-Day. and then you look around and go, and this is now just a regular French city once again. This is kind of
Yeah.
surreal, but we'll move on
Yeah.
with it. So yeah.
Wow. All right. So, what an incredible experience. You come out of there, you've got a history degree, you continue to pursue history.
Mm-hmm.
You've been teaching it and continuing to study it for a long time, in addition to HR and
Mm-hmm.
some other areas of expertise. Where and now you're studying Canadian military history with your PhD.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about your like area of focus now and what it means with all this
Yeah.
experience. Like it's all coming; these things come together. So I'm wondering how this all intersects now and what you're trying to do,
Sure.
what your mission is now.
Well, so the reason why I'm doing Canadian military history, it's really just to not sound too crass. It's a bit of
Mm.
marketability, and it's really kind of about making myself
Mm.
presentable to a future employer. I love Canadian history. I love the topic I'm doing. Um, and as I have kind of figured out, there is actually a bit of a long-term trajectory to my historical studies. Um, but yeah, but it really is just kind of like, okay, I'm living in Canada. I'm pretty sure I want to stay up here long term. The market for American historians is slightly smaller, but not impossible in
Okay.
Canada. So yeah, I need to kind
So
of
there's a
keep that.
practical application of being
Uh,
able to thrive in the area that you're living longer term.
yeah, and and beyond teaching, I'm also I'm open to working in the public sector. And for me, part of that in here in Canada, and part of that is kind of showing that I have a foot intellectually in both, still in both
Mm.
places. I have a foot in Canada, I have a foot in the States, and I'm willing to kind of offer that expertise
Yeah,
in both
absolutely.
places, which is why I'm doing the dissertation that
So
I'm
let's
doing.
talk about that dissertation.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
What do you I mean, it's a rigorous process to get a PhD and you got to defend it and everything. So what are you
right.
going to
I know. Yeah, you got to write a
what
book.
are
You
you
got to write a
going to be
book,
defending?
basically. So I am currently working on a dissertation that looks at the creation of the North American Air Defense Command,
NORAD.
NORAD.
War games.
Remembered
Oh,
war
yes.
games.
Matthew
Yes,
Broderick. Yes.
yes. Would you like to play a
Would you
game
like
of
to play a
chess?
game of chess? Yes. Yes.
So I'm looking at the
Yeah.
creation of NORAD in 1957, and really I'm kind of backing it up to the years leading up to it. And what I'm really interested in actually is how the personal relationships, the friendships between Canadian and American Air Force officers influenced and kind of helped create NORAD in
Mm.
57, and how they helped to create what I see as a unique military culture.
Mm. You mean within NORAD
In
itself?
well, no, so what I'm trying to say is that NORAD itself developed a unique culture. It's not an American
Right.
military
Yeah.
culture. It's not a Canadian military culture.
It's a
It's a
NORAD
NORAD
culture.
culture.
Wow.
That kind of obviously it kind of picks and chooses from both of them.
Oh. Any good examples from your research on that? Where of signs of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best one from the period that I'm looking at is in 1961. The deputy, so the way NORAD was, it's still
Mm-hmm.
set up this way, is NORAD is commanded by an American
Mm.
general. But then the second in command is always a Canadian. It's just that's the way it is. So when the American is gone, the Canadian is in charge.
Interesting.
And as like a slight footstep before I get to my story, what a lot of people don't realize is that on
Uh
nine
huh.
eleven, it was a Canadian in charge of NORAD and that morning.
Wow.
The American was out of town or not around, and it was the Canadian said, "We're grounding all air traffic in North
Wow.
America." and start sending up jets. And if we have
Shoot
to,
down
we will shoot
planes.
down
Yeah.
other. That was done by a
Wow.
Canadian,
And that
and that's fully within
his
his
authority.
rights and fully within the treaties. Yep,
Wow.
that that govern
Wow.
NORAD. So, but backing up to that, so in 1961, the Canadian second in command was a guy named Air Marshal C. Roy Sleman.
That's a great name.
Dashing guy. He had a great mustache and a great hairdo. But in 1961, NORAD had brought online what was known as the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System. So it was this radar system that was supposed to be able to track if the Soviets launched
Sure.
ICBMs at North America. And lo and behold, on that day, the NORAD commander was on a plane between, I think, Minneapolis and Colorado, and the alarm started going off. Burp, burp, burp. We are getting reports of ICBMs being launched. Everybody's kind of freaking out, and Air Marshal Sleman's the guy in charge.
Wow.
And things are just like, things just didn't quite seem right to him.
Something was off. Yeah.
Something was off. And he suddenly, and as people were kind of trying to figure out what was going on, he said, "Where's Khrushchev today?"
Ah.
And somebody kind of said, "Well, he's actually in New York for the UN General Assembly." And he said, "Forget it. This isn't real." And it turned out the system was brand new. It had been online for a month. The radars were so powerful, they were picking up the moon.
The moon.
The moon.
So it wasn't like picking up, Russian or at that time, yeah. It was reading the moon, and then he just goes, wait a minute, they wouldn't bomb the U.S. while Khrushchev's in New York.
Well, And really the other part of it too is that the computer, they're all like these analog computer readouts, right? Well, they didn't have enough digits to show the actual distance of the reading.
Oh, I see. So if you knew that, I don't think they're going to the moon. They're coming from the moon, Yeah.
Yeah. So they figured it out, but the cool part of that is Sleman makes this call, but the other interesting part of that is the general, who is a guy named Lawrence Cuter, the American general, he had radio contact with Sleman. And he basically said, "I don't know if my rate," because he was on an airplane, 1960s, the radios weren't all that great. And he basically said, "I don't know if my radios are going to be good enough. You got this, Roy. You take it. I trust you." And he did. And they did. And Roy Sleman kind of stopped World War III from happening.
Right.
But that's because of personal relationships and trust, and this culture of trust that NORAD had.
I'm just taking that all in, and actually I'm having a flashback to War Games again, because the basis of the movie War Games was, do we trust a computer?
Do you trust a computer?
Right. The Whopper.
The Whopper.
Yes.
So the funny thing is, though, here's, I guess, the computer that they used for that was actually a first generation computer used in North American air defense. The thing was already probably 20 or 30 years old, but it looked really cool because it was big.
So how much more of the research do you need to do before you can kind of start writing all this up?
Well, the research is basically done. So and in fact, today I was working on the outline for the first chapter. So the goal is in the next week to have an outline for the first chapter to my supervisor hopefully he will give me the thumbs up and let me go on my way with writing. I feel pretty confident with it. He knows even with the pandemic, we talk on a pretty regular basis.
Your relationship, speaking of relationship, your relationship with your advisor is very crucial.
It is. Yeah. And I'm very blessed to have an advisor who is very responsive. I have no doubt that within probably 48 hours of me giving him that outline, he'll have it back to me. Yeah, I mean, he's amazing.
I was going to say
in that
you're
way.
lucky, but on the other hand, it takes two to tango, so it's partially a reflection of you. So,
Well, but I know I have heard plenty of horror stories of PhD candidates waiting, weeks on end to get something back from a supervisor. So, I don't have
that is
that,
great.
luckily.
Yeah. I remember studying history, and I remember a professor of mine saying, you should consider continuing with this, and maybe do a PhD and become a history professor. And I think way back then I was like, something about I want to make money or whatever it was, and it's not very flattering about myself, but it's true. I mean, I saw the struggle of the professor trying to compete with so many people, and that is a reality, and that's still a reality. It's really tough business. So if you're going to stick with it the way you have, just kudos. It's a genuine drive to make a difference through history, which is so important. But I'd like to hear your perspective on why the study of history is important, and what the secular world, what they need to do to get the benefits of history.
Yeah. I've never been a fan of the whole history repeats itself thing. It just simply doesn't happen. History doesn't repeat itself. It echoes. I mean, we'll see similarities, and so it's always kind of cool when you can kind of look back and go, I think we've been through something similar before. But to me, the study of history has always been more about gaining a fuller and deeper appreciation for why things that are happening today are happening.
The reasons for them.
Yeah, because things that are happening today are so rarely coming out of a vacuum. They don't just spontaneously happen. There's reasons why things happen. And the study of history helps us to understand why those things happen so that we can make sense of those things. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, chart a course through it.
I'm just thinking about the private corporations that we sometimes deal with. And if a corporation hired a historian, maybe they hired you, and they said, we are in a change management situation. We're in not change management. We're in a change situation. Things have been volatile. We got to switch up our whole business. And if they hired a historian to be part of that, what role would the historian play in plotting a course for the future?
Well, I think the historian would potentially do one of two things. And obviously there's even there is the entire branch of business history, and they eat this stuff up. But really, to me, the historian would do one of two things. The historian could either look at the history of that organization to figure out where it's coming from. You might look into issues of culture in the organization. Why do you have that culture? How does the history of the organization influence that culture or speak to that culture? So you might do that, and that could help an organization or a business kind of chart its way forward. Is it a culture that they want? Is it a culture that they don't want? But then the other way too, and this is probably the more likely avenue in some respects, is also just looking at what have other organizations done in similar situations, and what can we learn from them, whether it's things that we should do or things that we should avoid at all costs. So that's what the historian can offer.
Right.
Along with being okay with spending hours ad nauseum reading through documents.
I think anyone who hasn't formally studied history or tried to write anything about it, I mean, the amount of time I spent looking at microfiche and thumbing through copies of old tax records from the 1880s from Eastern Oregon. I did a thesis for the Honors College at Oregon. and involved a whole bunch of literally handwritten tax logs. And I'm trying to like
Yeah.
decipher the
Yeah.
beautiful but hard to
Oh my.
read
Did,
cursive.
see, this is why I've kept myself in the
Oh,
20th century because
you can read
everything's
it.
typed. Yes. It's like every once in a while I'm like, oh God, not handwritten
Yeah,
notes. No, please, not
yeah,
handwritten.
that's
So
interesting.
yeah, I deal in periods of typed
Well,
records.
listen,
Luckily.
I mean, I'm excited about this dissertation, and I'd love to read it when it's done, and hopefully it makes it into a book. Is that your
That would be
goal, or
lovely.
what do you
Yeah, it's kind well, it is kind of usually the
yeah,
goal of most history PhDs is they want to turn those
I would think
dissertations
so.
into a book. So yeah, I
Well,
would
sign
love
me
to.
up. I'll pre-order. Hopefully,
Okay.
does Amazon do
Yes.
like 2-year pre-order?
I don't know. I don't know.
Um, so this is called Connections That Matter. So I've been thinking about some other questions related to that. We've heard about the relationship
Mm-hmm.
between the leaders at NORAD averting potential crisis. That's a pretty great, yeah,
Nuclear
just a small.
holocaust.
They avoided a small problem there potentially. Your relationships as you've moved around. Listen, I'm just curious if I were to ask you who are three people in your life that are some of, I'm not going to say uh, the most because I think that's too limited.
Yeah.
But if you just who are
Sure.
three people that come to mind in terms of being very significant for your journey thus far,
Ooh, the journey thus far.
getting you to
Ooh.
where you're at today,
Yeah.
influential in your journey. Who are those three people?
Right. Well, you can't have that question and be married and not think of your wife.
Of course,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, because you're
yeah,
life partners.
yeah,
Everything life decisions no longer take place in a
right,
vacuum. You know, and then especially when you start adding kiddos, then it even just then
even
it just
more, yeah,
magnifies even more. So, um, yeah, because what it can be one thing to say like this is what I want to do with my
mm-hmm.
career or this is where I want to go, but if that's not a mutually agreeable if that's not mutually agreeable, then then you have to ask yourself where are your
Yeah,
priorities.
yeah,
And maybe in some respects that's kind of the interesting is it really just like what are my
yeah,
priorities? Are my priorities my professional? Are my priorities
yep,
personal? And obviously at some level there are times when you have to try and negotiate and come to an agreement on how those priorities are gonna mesh. But yeah,
I'm here. I hear you. Yep.
yeah. Beyond that, the first person who's been sticking into my head, and actually he's been sticking in my head for a while lately, as we were kind of talking about this a week ago, and I've been thinking about this is um, a, a guy named Damian Cunningham, who is currently a lieutenant colonel in the Army, just about to retire. But when I was a captain, he was first Lieutenant Cunningham, and he was my executive
Mm.
officer in Germany. And, the important thing with Damien was my understanding of how a leadership team develops and work because we had a leadership team and he and I, even though I was technically his boss, we had that relationship where he could come in, close the door, and we could
Yeah,
hash stuff out. And I figured out very quickly that there were things he understood that I just needed to
I
shut up and
see.
listen. When I had some personnel and discipline issues with certain soldiers in my unit, Damien knew how to handle those things. And I said, "Okay, Damien, that's the way we're gonna handle it that way." And there were times, and you know what? And there were times when I had things, and he would say, Roger, sir, that's how we're gonna, yeah, that's how we're gonna handle it. But
Yeah.
we create, but and and the crazy thing is I don't. It's not like Damien and I ever kind of sat down and formally worked that out. We just somehow organically figured out that we got along and could work together, and it was going to be cool, and it was going to, yeah. I mean, and that's the reason why when I had to split the detachment, that I didn't worry, because Damien stayed in Germany. He stayed in Germany. Wow. And he handled it. I didn't have to constantly call and go, what's going on back there? Yeah. What's going on back there? He had it. And if there was something really bad going, he would call me and tell me. And it was good.
Wow. And
so and we still, I mean, yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yep. Yep. Which is, yeah, it's super cool. Number two.
That would be number two, man. We got, yeah.
That would be number two.
Yeah.
So number three, man. Like number three is like, I've got like this three-way tie of people in almost four. Because I'm slightly, like there's my dissertation supervisor, who's been phenomenal, and he is a veteran of the Royal Canadian Air Force, so he's a fellow vet. He got his PhD a little bit later in life too, so it's been super helpful that he understands the life situation. So he's not like the standard. I got my bachelor's at 22, and I had my PhD by like 26, 27, and my whole life has been in academia.
He gets it. Yeah.
So, which has been a blessing. It's been an absolute blessing. But then I'm just like, I'm thinking about two or three other leaders that I've had in the military who, quite honestly, had trust and faith in me, kind of like recognized that I could do something and kind of let me go. And occasionally had to rein me in, but they would let me go. So
okay.
And interestingly, for an army, I shouldn't say interesting. It's kind of, for what people think of the Army, like the two most influential military leaders in my life were both women.
In the military, in the Army, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They were both women. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And Angie Holbrook and Gail Yoshitani.
Shout out. All right.
Shout out to Gail, because Gail worked hard to get me a teaching job at West Point, and then coincidentally she came back and she was my boss when I taught at West Point. She's now the department head at West Point, in the history department. Yeah. So and she is a wonderful, compassionate leader.
That's amazing. Yeah.
She absolutely is. She absolutely is. Like, she is a leader that, she's one of those types that truly kind of transcends from leader into mentor. And one of those leaders that when I was facing some difficulties in the military, I could go to her and be candid with her, and she would give me candid, compassionate feedback. Which is, in some ways, it's hard to be candid and compassionate. But she has that skill, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic, but like being compassionate requires being honest, but it's hard to be. The amount of trust and care you have to have, and the other is so sensitive.
Well, yeah, because it's so easy to care. Well, yeah, and it's so easy to care about somebody and not want to hurt them. That it's easy to kind of slip into, no, it's all going to be okay, but it's that compassionate, honest person that can go no, this is a pretty bad situation right now.
Yeah.
And
so actually, I've talked to some leaders in private organizations that talk about the toxicity of niceness.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, listen, I actually am finding myself struggling because I want to dive deep into these amazing
Yeah, I know.
people, but I think we're going to have to leave it at what an amazing
No, it's
blessing
easy.
to have these
Yeah.
incredible people in your life and to be able to share about them and reflect on what they mean to you and your journey. And I think about
Definitely.
words really matter. As you were talking, I was thinking about my own spouse, and as I build business and I do the entrepreneurial thing, it comes with a lot of ups and downs. Like anyone who's doing anything tough, getting a PhD, for example, you have your moments where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. And I remember the
Yeah.
moments when my wife has said really encouraging, supportive things to me and how much that means to me. And I guess what I'm taking from what you're saying is those conversations, every conversation is crucial.
Absolutely.
Every,
Absolutely.
there isn't like, I'm going to have a crucial conversation now. No. Every conversation has the potential to
It's
change
crucial.
the trajectory
Yeah.
of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. Whether you even go into it thinking that it might or not.
Completely. Right. And it could change the course of
Yeah.
history. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your experience and some great stories.
Oh,
I
thanks
learned
for
a
letting
ton
me
about
share.
NORAD.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back and read more about it. That
There you
sounds
go.
really fascinating. So
We'll hold off for about a year or so, and then I'll give you my take on it.
Yeah, that's probably best. Let's come back. Actually, I want to say I'd love to come back and talk again when you've got a book with your name on it and see what you've learned then.
It's a deal.
Well, thanks for spending this time with me.
Yeah, thank you.